Imagine a quiet night just like any other, but destined to turn into a night of unforgettable horror. Picture this: our protagonist, a solitary figure moving through his home, every tick of the clock echoing in the silence. The evening is as ordinary as they come. He prepares a simple dinner for one, the sizzle of his meal, the only sound breaking the stillness. The ticking clock, the hum of the refrigerator, the occasional distant car passing by, all part of the symphony of his solitude. A comforting routine in a world often too loud, too fast. He savors the tranquility, the mundane tasks of his evening unfolding like a well-worn book he's read 1,000 times. The world outside fades to a whisper, leaving only the peaceful rhythm of his existence. But peace, as they say, is often fleeting. Little did he know, this was the calm before the storm. As the hours passed, strange occurrences began to unfold. Unfamiliar sounds started to punctuate the silence like a discordant symphony playing a chilling tune. The soft rustling of papers, a whisper of movement, the eerie creak of floorboards. These were noises that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. The protagonist, alone in the house, found himself straining his ears, trying to pinpoint the source of these sounds. But just as he would convince himself that the noise had been the wind or the house settling, another would startle him from his thoughts. Objects began shifting of their own accord. A book that had been left on the table was now on the floor, a chair pulled out from under the dining table. Doors that were previously shut would mysteriously swing open, only to slam shut again, as if manipulated by an unseen hand. His heart pounded in his chest, his palms grew sweaty. But still, he tried to rationalize these events. He told himself it was the wind causing the doors to open and close. Perhaps he'd forgotten where he'd placed the book or moved the chair and simply didn't remember. But then, the lights started to flicker on and off, plunging the house into darkness before returning it to light. The temperature dropped, a chill seeping into the bones. The wind outside howled like a beast, causing the windows to rattle in their frames. As these events continued to escalate, the protagonist found it increasingly difficult to dismiss them as mere coincidences or tricks of his imagination. His mind began to entertain darker thoughts, thoughts of the supernatural, of forces beyond his understanding. The once comforting solitude of his home was now a haunting isolation. Every shadow seemed to hide a lurking danger, every sound a sinister whisper. But still he clung to the hope that there was a logical explanation for everything that was happening. Yet, the thought of a rational explanation began to fade as the night grew darker. The house seemed to breathe with a life of its own, its pulse quickening with the falling of the night. And in the heart of the darkness, the true horror was yet to reveal itself. The line between reality and imagination began to blur. As the night progressed, our protagonist found himself in the throes of an escalating series of inexplicable happenings. Every creak of the old wooden floor, every rustle of wind against the window pane, every flicker of the half-lit bulb in the hallway amplified his growing dread. The comfort of his own home, once a sanctuary, was now a labyrinth of shadows and uncertainty. With each passing moment, the walls seemed to close in, the darkness grew denser, and the silence louder. His heart pounded in his chest, echoing the rhythm of his mounting fear. Questioning his sanity, he began a room-by-room search. The living room, a haven of family gatherings and cheery laughter, now felt eerie and desolate. The kitchen, a space of warmth and sustenance, seemed cold and uninviting. The bedroom, a place of rest and calm, was now a stage for his haunting fears. With every room he checked, every corner he peered into, he found nothing. Nothing but his own reflection staring back at him from the darkened glass, a mirror image of his fear. Yet the absence of evidence did nothing to quell his unease. On the contrary, it only amplified it. His home was no longer a familiar territory. It had transformed into a maze of the unknown, a playground for his escalating terror. The very air seemed charged with a foreboding that was as palpable as it was inexplicable. He tried to calm his racing mind, to rationalize the situation. But the harder he tried, the more his thoughts spiraled into a vortex of fear and paranoia. His own thoughts became his tormentor, conjuring up images and scenarios far scarier than any horror film. In the deafening silence, his own heartbeat was the scariest sound. It echoed through the empty halls, a constant reminder of his isolation, a chilling symphony to accompany his night of fear, a soundtrack to his very own horror story. In the deafening silence, his own heartbeat was the scariest sound. It was not what he could see that terrified him, but what he couldn't. An unseen presence began to dominate the house, an entity devoid of form but thick with a chilling aura. As if the very air had turned against him, the temperature in the house plunged, biting through the warmth of his clothes and pricking at his skin like icy needles. The usual hum of the house, the comforting background noise of the refrigerator, the clock ticking, the occasional creaking of an old house settling, were now punctuated by an eerie silence. It was as if the house itself was holding its breath, anticipating something dreadful. The darkness seemed to thicken, hanging heavy in the air, and the once familiar corners of the house now held an ominous mystery. Suddenly the lights began to flicker, casting unsettling shadows on the walls. The once steady glow of the lamp became an erratic, strobe-like pulse, as if the house's life force was under siege. He felt the electricity in the room shift, a disquieting sensation of static that made the hair on the back of his neck stand on end. But perhaps the most unnerving manifestation of this unseen presence was the feeling of being watched. He could sense eyes on him from every corner of the room, a scrutiny that was almost palpable. It was as if the house itself had grown eyes, following his every move, studying him with an inscrutable gaze. He was alone, yet not alone. He was in his own home, but it didn't feel like his anymore. It was as if he had trespassed into some otherworldly realm, a place that was eerily similar to his home, but twisted by an invisible hand into something far more sinister. The rooms were the same, the furniture was the same, but everything felt wrong, skewed, distorted by this unseen entity. And yet, he could not escape the unsettling feeling that this entity was not just in his home, but a part of it. As if it had been there all along, lurking in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to make its presence known. In his own home, he felt like an unwelcome guest. The unseen presence was not just a feeling anymore, it was real. As if the house itself had grown tired of keeping secrets, it unveiled an unexpected revelation. The protagonist stumbled upon a hidden room, a space previously unknown, tucked away behind a nondescript wall in the basement. This secret chamber was unlike any other part of the house. It was steeped in an icy coldness that clung to the skin, a chill that seeped into the bones, a stark contrast to the otherwise warm and inviting nature of the home. The temperature was not the only thing that was off about this room, it was the aura, the vibe it gave off. It was as if the room was pulsating with a sinister energy, a malevolent force that seemed to beckon and repel at the same time. The walls of this concealed space were covered in symbols and signs, arcane and cryptic. They were etched deeply, as if carved with fervor and a sense of urgency. The sight of these strange markings triggered a sense of dread, a primal fear that suggested these were not just random scribbles. They held meaning, a message perhaps from the unseen presence. The protagonist felt a shiver of realization. This room was the undeniable proof he'd been seeking. It was a tangible testament to the unseen presence that had been haunting him. It wasn't his imagination playing tricks on him. The horror, the fear, wasn't just a product of being alone in the house. It was real. It was here. It was in this room. The room was a chilling reminder that sometimes the most terrifying things are those that lurk in the shadows, the unseen, the unknown. It was a stark revelation that sometimes the walls around us hold secrets, stories that are better left untold. Finally, he was not just feeling the horror, but seeing it. The unseen presence was no longer a specter lurking in the shadows. It had taken form. It was no longer just a part of his fear, it had become his reality. In his own home he was a stranger, a prisoner of the unseen. His haven had become a cage, a stage for a horror play he never auditioned for. Every door, every window, every conceivable exit was locked. It was as if the house itself had turned against him, refusing to let him go. He was trapped, alone with the unseen presence. The terror was palpable, a tangible shroud that wrapped itself around him, squeezing the breath out of him. Each tick of the clock echoed in the silence, each second stretching into an eternity. The fear was no longer just a feeling, it was his reality. He was caught in a twisted game of hide and seek, but there was nowhere left to hide, no escape from the unseen entity that held him hostage in his own home. As he stood there, trapped and terrified, a chilling voice echoed in the house. "You're not alone anymore."